the top part of the mushroom is wider than the bottom or the stem part of the mushroom. And the widest part, the mushroom top, would be 149 feet across. The lower part is 115 feet across, and the height is 71 feet. Now, to put this in perspective, an A320 Airbus has a wingspan of 117 feet. So compare 117 feet to 149, it can get in there with plenty of room left over.
Interesting.
And not only that, there are a series of, they kind of look like looking down on badminton cocks. They're all lined up. Two of them have lights that are glowing. This line of a bunch of these things is directly in line with this entrance to the interior. So to me, it looks sort of like a runway to take you right to the entrance. Okay. And we have pictures of this, so you don't. There's no way I can verbally describe all this, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 5 photos to go with that story. Plus, we had the coordinates, so you can take these coordinates, put it into Google Earth, and you can find these things for yourself, because we have so many people that get their jollies out of creating fiction with their Photoshop. And so when people can find things for themselves, then they have they can believe it's real and not Photoshopped.
Well, I hate to say it, the two things I find is really Photoshopped big time is UFOs and Bigfoot. And to the point, it just drives me crazy. Or the people have a digital camera, the type where you can swap lenses, and they never clean their sensors, so they're sitting there taking pictures. They don't see anything. They're taking sky shots. They come back, and they load it on their computer. Oh, no. Oh, my God, I got a picture of a UFO.
No, but that's true. That is absolutely true. That can happen. It doesn't take Photoshop. When some of these ships are moving through the air, many times your eye cannot see them. And I have gotten pictures myself where all I've done is snap pictures of the sky, and when I've looked at it, I've found things in the pictures. So you can't blow them all away as Photoshop.
I do believe that, too, because, one of my hosts, he runs a UFO I-Team group where they go out and try to prove UFOs exist and all that stuff. Back here last summer, they had their infrared video camera set up, and actually they captured something. It was like a portal opened up in the sky, and it looked like a UFO came out of it. And, and then poof, it was gone. And I saw that, and that really, that circulated for a little while, and then all of a sudden it was gone. But it was really interesting.
Most of the time, nobody has a camera ready for something that happens that quickly and suddenly. But if somebody catches it, that's really terrific.
Yeah, he had his camera out there, looking for UFOs and stuff. And, actually, then, he didn't even know this happened after he started playing it back. And then all of a sudden you could clearly see something like opened up, and here comes a UFO out of it. So that makes me wonder, even right there more, why, I don't know. I just wish I got a funny feeling a lot of stuff is going on right now in Washington, D.C., is to try to keep people's minds off of everything. I was really hoping, Steve Bassett was really hoping last year it would be, the government would come out and say UFOs exist. He's hoping it'll happen this year, but I don't think so with the turmoil that's going on. But I think it's time that we are really informed, what is going on, because you know what? The trust in our government is going to be so much broken if some other country all of a sudden comes forward and says, okay, we've been visited, here's proof.
Well, some other countries are much more open to sharing their information than our country is.
Yeah, that's the scary part. I mean, I'm not trying to scare people like, hey, if you go to bed tonight, you don't know if you're going to be abducted, or if you go out on a long road trip out in the middle of nowhere, you could be abducted. I don't know. I don't even know how they pick the people they abduct. But I wouldn't really worry about it. If it happens, it happens. You can't stop it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's I think there was even a song that used this image, and it's Worry is a rocking chair. You go back and forth and get nowhere. So you can't allow yourself to dwell on this. Be aware of it, but don't dwell on it. It doesn't do anybody any good. And as far as disclosure goes, I'm one of those who thinks that everybody's waiting for the government to make all the announcements. We are getting information, and it's been coming through many different ways, and that is the disclosure. And when enough of that gets out there where the government can't dance around it anymore, then they will admit to things. But I'm not one who would sit in Washington waiting for the government to give authenticity to all this.
I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't, again, there's groups that actually think it's going to happen here shortly, just because, like Project Blue Book from the History Channel, they're saying, "Oh, it's now closed." I don't think so. I mean,
Project Blue Book was a big deception from the very beginning. So if they're doing stuff about Blue Book on TV, it's such watered down information.
I think so. And just, I don't even think that maybe they canceled the program originally, but I think it was probably ongoing and still ongoing under some other
with a different name.
A different name,
right?
So any other?
I agree.
Yeah. Any other strange things going on that the people out there should be interested in hearing about?
Well, this isn't strange, but for anybody who lives where Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee come together, I will be speaking about UFOs and Bigfoot here in North Carolina at the exhibition Bigfoot Museum, which is in the very northern part of Georgia, in just south of a town called Blue Ridge, Georgia. And it's a very nice museum, by the way. So even if somebody couldn't come to the lecture, which will be on Groundhog Day, which is February 2nd, the neat thing about this presentation is it's not just me talking. I have put together lots and lots of photos, and in order to do that, I had to give myself lessons on how to do PowerPoint. But it's not it's not a PowerPoint with lots of words on the screens. It's PowerPoint with lots of photos.
Oh, interesting. And when is this going to be? And where?
All right, it's Exhibition Bigfoot. It's actually in a little town called Cherry Log, and it's like a crossroad, but it's south of a town called Blue Ridge, Georgia, and it's not that far north of Atlanta, so even people from Atlanta a lot of times will come up to Blue Ridge for, long weekend vacations. And I will be speaking from 6 to 8, and again, it's Groundhog Day, if that's easier to remember.
Oh, wow. Now, you mentioned Bigfoot and stuff. Anything you can tell us, news on what's going on in the community of Bigfoot? Any new sightings in your area or anything?
I have a lot of information. I'm going to be sharing a lot of things about our most active case. I'm not active, but the most complicated case with many aspects to it. And it's one where we got hair samples and lots of photos, and the Bigfoot wrote on the walls and did all sorts of different kinds of things. So it's a very unique story that is nice to be able to present it in a visual form. But the newest thing that we have is, and it kind of ties in with the Bigfoot, there's a woman who lives just north of Nantahala Lake in North Carolina, and she lives in a remote area, she and her family. And she's been clearing land for a garden, and she's been finding these giant stone spearheads. And they're just too big and heavy for any regular human to use them. And it's the second place that we've found these kinds of stones. So there's something here that I think we're going to find out more about regarding giants that used to live in the area. And confirmation of that came to some extent when people who were students at Western Carolina University in the anthropology department told me that they had at that time two giant skeletons with 6 toes in their forensic storage lab. And then I found out this summer from somebody who was a senior, I think, in that program, that those bones and some of the bones of the Cherokee Little People had been sent to the Smithsonian. And I found that very, very sad because so many skeletons of giants have been shipped to the Smithsonian since the 1800s, and they just disappear and nobody ever sees them again. So when I heard that, I was disappointed.
Yeah, it seems like that's what is interesting. It seems like all these things are being sent there, and then when people inquire about it, it's like, we don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Oh, and you asked if there was a new story. Sometimes things float around in my mind, and I forget that something has just newly been posted. We've got one. It's called Bigfoot Knocked at 2 Homes in Murphy, North Carolina. Murphy, again, is in the mountains here, and it is almost due north of where I'll be speaking, just south of the border in Georgia. And this man was telling us about how basically he was awakened because he heard the thumps on the outside of his house, and he paid attention, and then he heard another thump, and a few minutes later he heard another thump, and his house is at the base of a hill, and he says he finds rocks up against the house, so he assumed the rocks had rolled down and bumped the house. And then the next morning he gets a text message from an elderly neighbor who asked him to come down and check her house out because she wanted to see if a tree branch was hitting her house, because all night long something was thumping at the side of her house, and it kept her awake all night. And she lives like 500 yards down the hill from the man, so it wasn't very likely that rocks were hitting her place too. And basically, when he went down there and checked it out, there was no tree branch hitting the house, but he could see like packed down earth where something had been walking around the house, and I think he found it around where his house was too. And then all in the same time frame, he later, I guess maybe that same day, went out on his porch just to drink his coffee, and he heard something that sounded like a deer or a bear or something in the woods near his house, and he looked in that direction. He saw a Bigfoot. So that's it's the second report that we've gotten from Bigfoot being in that area.
That is very interesting. Now, have anybody described when they see the Bigfoot how it walks or runs or anything? Because, in my case, I saw it run on 2 legs and then 4. Ed Roman was one of my guests. He's Canada's number 1 or number 2 folk singer. Had an encounter with a Bigfoot. He described the same thing. He saw it when it was running after him. It was running on 2 to 4 legs. What type of reports are you hearing about? How do they, do they run like that, or are they running on 2 feet?
Most of the reports I hear are 2 feet.
Interesting. Now, in your part of the country, what does the Bigfoot, what do they look like? I'm just kind of curious compared to what here in the Northwest, if they vary in what their looks are.
What I've been able to piece together is that the smallest Bigfoot are like in Florida, and they're called swamp apes. That's the local lingo for them. The largest ones tend to be out in the extreme west of this country, and the rest of the country kind of have the more medium-sized ones, which would be most likely under 8 feet or 9 feet maybe. So we get a smaller version usually from my reports that I get compared to some rather tall ones that they get in the mountains of the west.
I'm just curious. Now, they all been the people I've had on the show, or the emails I get from people who claim they ran across or saw a Bigfoot. They all seem to say the same thing, that they're warm and they're fuzzy and they give off orbs. They don't look like they would attack them or kill them or anything. They're just more curious about us. Are you hearing the same thing?
Again, we can't lump everything into one category. When I was out in South Dakota in October,